Good morning, Secretary of State George. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with Surface Against Sewage and with members of the End Sewage Pollution Coalition today. We're here today to present you with the End Sewage Pollution Petition, which has been signed by 44,691 people who are concerned about the health of our rivers and ocean, particularly in relation to sewage pollution and agricultural pollution. As you might know, the End Sewage Pollution Coalition is made up of 19 organisations, including leading national environmental charities, water sports national governing bodies, youth activists and water sports media, who together represent supporters, memberships and audiences of millions of people nationwide. Representatives of some of the members are joining us today to say a few words on our shared goals and vision for thriving and restored natural rivers and coastal ecosystems free from pollution. This builds on the work that Surface Against Sewage and the Rivers Trust have been spearheading to track, report and act on the impacts of ongoing sewage and diffuse pollution of our waterways and beaches through the Safer Sea Service and the Together for Rivers campaigns. I'm now going to hand over to some colleagues from the coalition who will introduce themselves and say a few short words. So Christine, please.
Thank you, Hugo, and good morning, Secretary of State. My name is Christine Colvin. I'm from the Rivers Trust, and we're calling for world-leading water quality legislation. We want an environment bill that exceeds the existing EU water quality standards to take the best chance as we now exit the EU. We want sewage legislation that sets ambitious and legally binding targets to end untreated sewage discharge into all bathing waters by 2030. And we want legislation that upholds the same high standards for both inland and coastal waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And Chantal.
Thanks, Hugo. Good morning, Secretary of State. I'm Chantal Grundy from British Canoeing, and we are calling for an enhanced water quality testing regime. We want accurate, real-time water quality information available all year round for all UK inland and coastal bathing areas. We want an enhanced regime which tests for emerging threats such as antibiotic-resistant bacteria and viruses.
Thank you, Chantal. And Oliver.
Hello, I'm Oliver Pitt from the Outdoor Swimming Society. We want nature-based solutions to sewage pollution. We want increased investment and associated targets for the restoration of natural habitats to reduce pressure on the water systems and help prevent sewage overflow.
Thank you, Oliver. And Freddie.
Freddie, you're on mute.
Hello, Mr. Eustice. I'm a young supporter of Windrush against sewage pollution. There are two pictures behind me, which are of the river near Burford where I live. The first one, with the ducks on and the water crowfoot weed beds, was taken in 2009, just when the water companies were left to police the cleanness of the water themselves. The second one was taken 8 years later in 2017 on the same spot. So you can see the problem. I've been interested in the water in the Yorkshire Dales too, and supported the team on the River Wharf test for water quality this summer. My question is, can you take firm action on the water companies which will allow the rivers and riverbanks and nature really to recover from all this sewage pollution? Our rivers need saving. I'm asking this so that my generation and those after us can swim and play and enjoy our rivers and seas again, safely. My role model is Sir David Attenborough, and you will already know that he is telling us clearly that the truth is the natural world is changing, and we are totally dependent on it. It provides our food, water and air. It is the most precious thing we have, and we must defend it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Freddie.
Thank you, Freddie. And George, we'd like to invite you to respond and update us on the government's progress and action.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for all of those contributions. But Freddie, I particularly, I think that was very striking to see those two pictures of the river one from a few years ago, one more recently, and and a lot of other very good points as well about the importance of upgrading our infrastructure, around enforcement, better monitoring. All of these are a good points. And if I could just say a little bit about what we're trying to do in this area, both on sewage, but also agricultural diffuse pollution as well. On the latter, we're completely changing the way that we support farming and agriculture literally from next year. And one of the things that we'll be doing with the change in emphasis of our funding is taking away some of the subsidy payments that farmers get next year. And we're going to use quite a lot of that money to significantly increase the scale of a project that we have called catchment sensitive farming. And that is advisors and also availability of grants to help farmers invest in better slurry management facilities and manage the way that they spread farmyard manure on their land so that you reduce the amount that can get into water courses. So that's one big change that we're going to start literally from next year. And on the sewage release, there's two key areas really. The first is the so-called CSOs, the combined sewage outflows, which are, we have this problem in Cornwall. And the issue really is it's quite linked to flooding in that essentially a lot of our Victorian buildings had street drainage that went into exactly the same system as foul water and sewage. And if you get flash flooding, flash rainfall events, it overwhelms those sewage plants. And then basically what happens is they have these emergency outflows. Now, that having made some progress, the sad truth is that things have started to go backwards slightly in recent years. And that's partly linked to the fact that we're getting more flood events, more flash rainfall events. And so this is really, in my view, something that we need to look seriously at. And we've set up a task force to look at this area. But I had a meeting with our officials a couple of weeks ago to explore things that could be done. And what's clear to me is that since really the 1960s, we have built street drainage that is separate from the sewage system, and it ought to be easier and better to separate that out so that it can be treated differently and doesn't overwhelm our sewage systems. But sadly, all too often, although it starts off separate, it kind of ends up going back into the same, connected back into the same pipe, so it compounds the problem. So I think we need to start looking at those hard engineering solutions that would, particularly in those later properties, take that step to separate out the street drainage system from the sewage system, because it just makes no sense at all. And then the second big area is I think we just need to look at changing the infrastructure. There are a lot of smaller sewage works that have closed and things have been centralized into larger operations. It may well be that there should be a sort of backup plan that those smaller mothballed sites can be brought back on stream when there's a flood event and it's needed. So there's quite a few things like that, and also other technologies that I'm interested in that might help in the short term to mitigate the impacts of this. But I think it's a really important issue, and we should start to see the problem of CSOs and those sewage outfalls as linked really to a wider flooding issue. And when we think about infrastructure to manage flood risk, that flood risk should also extend to thinking about the risk to our water quality and risk to our environment from CSOs that are a consequence of flood events. So there's quite a bit of work that we've got going on in this area, both on agriculture, but also on addressing this problem of CSOs. There is actually a private members bill, a bill before Parliament at the moment, brought by a colleague of mine called Philip Dunn, and I've met him to discuss the contents of that bill. He's got some quite interesting ideas around tougher requirements on building regulations when new houses are built, and I'm quite interested in that. And there is planning legislation coming down the tracks, and I'm interested in whether we could take some of those themes into that and consider some changes to the legislation. And there's many different things that we'll need to do. So there's no one magic silver bullet to address this problem. We need to address it on multiple fronts through improving the planning, upgrading some of that ancient drainage infrastructure, and also changing the balance of our agriculture policy. And I'm confident that if we do that, we can start to see trends moving in the right direction. And our environment bill that's currently going through Parliament and will be on the statute book next year will be setting some quite ambitious targets to improve water quality. It's one of the key statutory requirements that government will have under that new bill, and it'll also need to have a plan to get there. So I hope that's a good summary of what we're doing, but thank you all very much. I know you've had a lot. I know this is a very topical issue at the moment, and I'm also, we do recognise that things have, having made some good progress in the last few years, there's some worrying signs that things have started to go backwards again.
Well, George, as you know, I'm Amy from Surfers Against Sewage, and it's been really great to have your time today and to hear about some of the plans that you've got in place, and particularly through the task force that you outlined. Really hope that the government can look to adopt some of the parts of Philip's bill. We see that bill as being very strong, having some really good points in it. So really hope that government can support that. We're really encouraged to hear about your plans that you're putting in place and the action that you'll be taking to restore the blue ecosystems. And we really look forward to seeing those being delivered in the very near future. So again, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it's a very busy time for you. So appreciate you can make the time to take receipt of this petition today. Thank you very much.